Okay.
That's correct. And of course, it's going to depend also on expenditures for this year.
And can I throw in some examples of times that we might need to dip into it, just for the audience at home? Like if and fact check me on this, if Title I gets frozen for some reason, and we have people whose salaries come from Title I, we could use that to pay them in the meantime, and then when it's unfrozen, we could refund back to that account. And then even like, would food services maybe need that sometimes if like a government shutdown with reimbursement on food services?
Food services operates a little bit differently, and we actually have to provide a certain amount. I mean, there's maintenance of effort in all these, and
Yeah.
we would use funding till the
Yeah.
end of the year and then decide where that funding would come from, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, if title was all of a sudden taken away.
Okay.
Remember when we take something from M&O, if we place it into, when we take something out of a grant and we place it in M&O.
Supplanting,
Yeah,
yeah.
if it's got a supplanting rule, we can't put it back.
Yeah.
However, having that balance allows us to
Yeah.
kind of move forward without, drawing down.
Yeah.
And then, we can draw down eventually, so.
Okay. One more thing about that. So this would prevent us from getting into a situation like nearby districts where they've been insolvent and had a hard time making paychecks.
That is correct. And I
Yeah.
believe that when the discussion came up about fund balance last time, it was when we were going over the Auditor General's report that was showing that a lot of districts were in a negative status with enrollment, fund balance, shifts in moving less M&O to capital. And so that was, I believe, the reason why this came up was because it was important. It's important for the group to make sure that we have some type of reserve.
I just want to add really quick to Mr. Williams' point is that despite everything that's happening right now in the district, this is kind of a good thing that the district has been, it's not kind of a good thing, it is a good thing that the district has been doing for some time, and I think it's gotten lost with everything else going on, so I'm glad that we're having this open discussion about it. But Mr. Thompson?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could put some dollar figures to the context of maybe some examples that wouldn't be used. Like we use Title I, for example. How much money does the district spend in Title every year, or other scenarios where, okay, this happened, how much is that going to be?
So title, I believe, was about $12 million. And the majority is salaries. There is purchase services that comes out of that. But that's an example of like, okay, something happens, we have to remove that. There is also a scenario that I'll throw out there where, for example, this is you're kind of going into desperation at this point, right? And you've got 2 chillers that go out, and we're like, we have fund reserve, and we want to move more from M&O into capital to be able to buy this equipment. And so that would be kind of in a very dire circumstance where you're like, oh, like there's no capital funding at all, or like I have very limited amount. Chillers cost about $20 million in our system. We have dual systems at each site. But that's another example. An example that I can give is also if we have for whatever reason, a significant drop in enrollment from one year to the next. That's where we would want to be able to have those reserves. It is important that while, this is also, for emergencies, unexpected needs, I think there's also, when we're looking at unexpected needs, if, we have an increase in some type of service that we have to provide for whatever reason. But I think, when we're looking at it, it's those larger grants, those larger amounts, if it's When I'm gonna say, if it's like, you know, a cost that's like $50,000, considering the size of our budget, which is $386 million, $50,000 is not, like, we're not gonna be like, we can't survive this. But a 12 million will be significant. You know, and so that's, you know, just to give you kind of figures in a sense.
Dr. Yalva, I remember you saying at the beginning, especially with the ESSER funds, and that was one of the major contributor for our today's reserve money. But also, that also means that we have to save our reserve fund. Like, I know it is 80 million today, maybe 78 tomorrow. But in the next coming years, we may not have that level of cushion to refill it at the same rate. That's also another crucial reason. Like, it's not like I can save some more. We are in budget cut already, so there is no way we can save money to put it back. So,
Right, I think what you're saying is that we're not gonna have well, we don't expect a large amount of
Influx.
money like ESSER to occur again. And so that's, you
there is an
know,
emergency of 10 million,
Right.
let's say, this year.
Yep.
It is hard, given the budget scenario, that we can bring it back to 80. So that's a reason policy like this will help us.
Right.
To take the right decisions and only the most needed expenses to be kind of balanced using this figure, because it is the part that once you take it out, it's it's gone. You know, that's
Right.
where, and we are seeing, I need to also share, I think you mentioned that article clearly in a couple of newspapers, the top 10 districts who are in red majorly, because one of the factors of the same common factors, but one of the major ones that differences our district from that is having the reserve fund, where the district may have to take very tough decisions, especially one, I think it's a public information, maybe Tucson may be a great example, who have depleted all their funds. In their public meeting, they shared it. You know, that may be a good example what will happen if not, kind of thing.
That's correct. And thinking of long-term sustainability, right, regardless of who's in this role or how things shift, having a policy will kind of allow us to have that cushion available, that rainy day fund, and it's been established and vetted. So that allows the district to be sustainable at a long term.
Maybe this may be Dr. Payton's favorite word, guardrails. Guardrails, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love a metaphor, and I've used this a couple times, and I'll keep using this with people when I talk with them about it. But we're like a family of 30,000 people, most of whom are children. So if we're making a budget for that family, we shouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck when we have the ability to maintain savings, so that a flat tire isn't going to make us unable to, you know, make the next payment.
Beautifully stated.
So I'm actually not a huge fan of this, I guess, example, for a couple reasons. One, I think it needs, this is looking at M&O, which I think we need really more of a holistic approach, because your example about capital, well, it could be possible that you have reserves in capital that you could fill it in. So limiting it to M&O to say that, I think it's too narrow. So you need to look at what is the bond situation, what is the capital situation, even other funds, Medicaid or auxiliary, other things can all be an account because you can use different aspects of it. So I think that's one thing that we need to look at for that.
So what I'm hearing you say, because I was thinking the same thing, it's kind of like an umbrella policy, where you have the bond under it, the capital under, it's just an overall policy that would encapsulate these different components for whatever area needs to be covered based on that for all funds.
Right,
Okay.
'cause
Or a list of funds.
Right, because so if we had a lot of bonds that have been authorized and we can sell, or if we have a large capital carryover, I would be less concerned about having that M&O because we have other sides of it. So if we only do capital or M&O and say we need this much, but then we have a lot everywhere else, it's a lot, we're sitting on a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's my concern, is that reserves don't teach kids. Reserves don't, clean schools and drive buses. And so the size of it at, we're talking $60 million. To Mr. Williams' example of a flat tire, $50,000 or something like that, even 12 million in title, if you had half of that, you could absorb that. In my thought, in the very slim situation where something catastrophic is happening, you could still handle that at half of that level. So I think it's a little higher than I would like, because we're making cuts preemptively, and the thought that, oh, if something catastrophic happens, well, if something catastrophic does happen, we would have to make cuts anyway, but we're just making those cuts in the first place. So I think having a reserve policy can be a good idea, but I think with a district this large, the percentage almost can be smaller, as opposed to if you were a tiny one school district, you might have a higher percentage, because that chiller goes out, that is a huge chunk of your budget. It's not as much for a district of this size. You'd have to have 3 or 4 chillers go out, and then you have real issues on it. So those are my issues and concerns with it, that it might just be the district sitting on too much money when you could be using that to educate the teachers, to pay the employees more for other things, and still have options. I mean, if you didn't have title, I mean, there's also the option of making cuts then, but we're making cuts ahead of time. So I do have some concerns on that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Are there any other comments before we move into more discussion? I have an idea for discussion for some time, but Mr. Williams?
You know more about budgets than me. So I would have some questions that can be a later type thing, but is there a reason it would be, like, is M&O more portable? Is it easier to move money out of M&O? Or if there's an umbrella fund, is there a type of account like that? Or would we then be separating it out to like a certain percentage, but bucketed in different things?
So M&O, a lot of costs come out of M&O. It's flexible in what you can use it for. In terms of, I will say, like, we have a high bond amount, but I will say that throughout the year, the amount of chillers that we need to rent and do things as a district of 20 sites is quite a bit. But typically when we talk about the budget, we usually talk about M&O, and it's kind of an indicator of financial health. Typically also in grants, for example, a lot of times you do have like, a 15%, I think, carry forward that you can take. And it just depends on the year, right? Some years it's like, oh, our allocation went down. For example, this year allocations went down quite a bit. And so it's like that 15% carry forward you may or may not have. And it just depends on the year. I would say most of the funds are pretty restrictive, with the exception of probably Medicaid, which you can kind of use for a lot of different things. Kind of like M&O in a sense, but all the other funds are pretty, classroom site fund, for example, is paid for, you have to use it to pay for teachers. You can't supplant. There's all these different rules. Plant fund is really like for capital items in a sense. So there's every fund has a lot of restrictions. And so we look at it, M&O in a sense, because it's where you have most of your expenditures. It's where you have most of the flexibility. And what you can do, to answer your question, I guess, indirectly, is you can contribute a little bit larger percentage of M&O into capital. So every year at the beginning of the year, you have the decision or ability to say, like, hey, we're going to put 5% of what we get for our budget into capital. Once you move it in there, it stays in there. Of course, the following year you can revise, but there's, things change. But the idea is M&O is that fund that's a little bit more, if we have to pay for services and different things, you pay out of M&O for the most part. Most of the other ones are pretty restrictive in our state, I would say, compared to other states. They're actually very restrictive. And so, and then when we say restrictive, it's like they have Yeah, prescribed intentional uses.
I had one
Mr.
more
Thompson?
thought, of maybe just softening the wording as well, because the example that we had, kind of says, shall maintain, no less than. I have seen other policies that say something more like, strive to maintain, to give you a little more wiggle room, because honestly, I would trust you and the administration to know, oh, okay, well, we don't need to necessarily have as much now because we have the bond and capital reserves, and so we can go a little lower on M&O this year, and it gives you a little more flexibility rather than locking you into that hard, you shall have this much. So softening the wording might be helpful as well.
Mr. Rennie?
Question, and we may have gotten this already, but like this year felt like it was a financial hardship, like this felt like a year. I'm curious, like how much of our reserves we used in this year when it was a difficult year, right? When things came up and challenges of how
So-
much did we use this year?
So we used reserves essentially to not cut last year for this year. And so what we cut was for this year and next year, and that's based on our enrollment. So it'd be about half in a sense if we're looking at it. At the end of the year is really we'll reconcile and be like, okay, this is exactly what it was. But there's a lot of moving parts this year with a lot of, just gonna say like unexpected things that just keep popping up. Like this week, there's quite a bit of things that showed up that will probably cost some money. I'll just say that. But I think we'll have that, but the idea was when we did all this was that we'll ride on reserves this year, and then what we're cutting right now for next year is kind of for both years.
And I think that's just where I was coming from. If this is like considered a bad year, like what percentage of that pot did we use? Because if we're using 40% of that pot, it's like, oh my gosh, we do need that. If it's 5% of that pot, it's like, okay, this is a bad year, and that's what we used. So just a thought.
So I would like to ask the committee to take about 10 minutes just to review the materials. If you see any language, maybe circle it, put questions, or if there's any additional ideas on what the reserves should look like, then maybe take some notes on that as well. So we'll go until 5:35 p.m. have about 3 more minutes. Okay, could I call the Budget Committee back to order, please? Thank you. So hopefully that 10 minutes was helpful to kind of maybe have some discussion close by and kind of hear some perspectives. Is there any additional feedback? Mr. Thompson? Oh, I saw a finger point. Oh, okay. I was like, and, yes.
Well, we had some questions about interest, if it generates interest, and my answer is yes, but we can't use it, so take it up with the legislature. That is a ridiculous rule. There was other discussions of, like I said earlier, having a broader one, maybe like a 5 to 15%, and that where you can take into account to say, okay, if the bonds or the overrides start not passing, probably going to go more on that 15 side. If you have, because it looked like we had 42 million in capital reserves, that would make me feel like a little more comfortable and say, okay, we could go lower on that. So those are kind of the thoughts, is giving the district a little more wiggle room of a range rather than a set amount that we have to have every year, because circumstances can change with the other areas of it. So that was one thing I liked on that.
I like the range because I think it gives the district more flexibility and ability to do different things, and even like one of the things we always talk about is also investing to be able to bring more students, and so you want to have that flexibility to do different things as needed.
I know something we were talking about was just really defining the different areas of what it would look like, and so maybe having a discussion about what those definitions would be, regardless of who's at the table at the time. You know, we talked about like contingency, prevention, things like that, and so just being able to, one, identify and understand why we would need those definitions, and then really define what that would look like for our district. Mr. Williams?
I was worried about the definitions being a little too tight to where something comes up that we hadn't thought of. Yeah. And so like wording that would make me feel a little bit more comfortable would be in section 3, right before the bulleted list, exceptional circumstances include but are not limited to. Were y'all thinking the same? Okay. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is flexibility.
Mr. Rennie?
I wondered as I was reading these, like, what's the current, like, district policy deciding how to use reserve funds?
There isn't one. That's why this discussion came up. Yeah. Me.
Ms. Jimenez?
Thank you. And that was my question as well, because I noticed here on the number 3, use of reserves, the last statement, reserves shall not be used to fund reoccurring expenditures without a sustainable reoccurring revenue source, which I appreciate. But where I'm hesitant, not necessarily opposed, but all reserve use requires governing board approval. Governing board members are voted out, they resign, they change, they're appointed. Just something to keep in mind. That's all I'll say.
And I do think that that's, what direction we want to go. Ultimately, the board, that's their duty, is to implement, to develop and implement policy. And so the question, that's something we will recommend, and they can say, yeah, we're ready for this, or like, we're going to wait, or we want to keep going with it. But the idea would be, there are a lot of policies that we have in some areas where it's like, governing board grants superintendent or designee the authority to do X, Y, and Z.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose can we reassure, or how do we assure that, or at least can we state to make sure that some of these conversations will still be held in the IBN process? Because I'm just fearful if we, as an IBN team, consents and vote to move forward with something that's proposed to the board, and the board does not find that it's agreeable, then we're at a standstill. We have to go back to the table. So that's just my only hesitation and comments about that board line. Maybe it's not so, I mean, of course we want board approval and inclusion and insight, but I don't know if maybe we should add some sort of contingency statement or some sort of, ending statement to kind of counter, shall, we not meet or agree, or, I don't know if I'm explaining myself right. I'm sure somebody can pull apart and piece together a question for me, but I think you all understand where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Because I was thinking, would it be possible to even add a simple statement that it could be updated or revisited at any time for any of those circumstances? There has to be something that allows that flexibility to say that this policy isn't bound, I guess, to what it actually states, but it still allows for that flexibility to revisit and update based on what's happening with the budget in general or what's happening with education in general. I don't know, just something simple so that we're not coming to heads with both entities. Just a simple statement that it could be updated at any time and revisited by the board and or whomever that would be. Just kind of, I think that's what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
Well, and remember that the governing boards, though, like, a lot of their duty is policy. And so I think that that's what we would bring. I mean, we can bring recommendations to them, but that's like a big part of governance is policy. In regards to IBN, I believe that there's already language about bringing projections and that kind of stuff like we do. And I don't, like, this wouldn't, I know where you're going with it, because you're like thinking, oh, it's salary negotiations in a sense, but this is more for the fiscal health, if that makes sense. I don't know, but I see where you're going, but What we can do is, I'm taking notes. Next time we'll bring, well, not the next meeting, probably the meeting after that, or after that, because we're gonna have data. At some point, we're starting this early. But the idea is we'll bring this and maybe other policies or other examples, and then give, so we can collect more data, because it'll take a while, before we make the recommendations. Go ahead. Sorry, I forgot your.
There's a long on-ramp to being able to spend any of this money too. I see it has to go to the board. It says board committee twice, so that's 2 months and a full board meeting brought by the superintendent. So this looks like it would take a while for any of this money to be spent. I do like that it says except under emergency circumstances. All reserve use requires governing board approval. Would it make sense for there to be a small amount that the governing board pre-approves to be used? Or like, is there a little wiggle room? Like how this year you've had to use it some in different ways? Like, this just seems like a really long process for a bunch of like little things that I don't know if they would rise to the definition of emergency. I don't, like, just hearing about how it's had to be used several times this year.
And I think, again, we're making recommendations. Ultimately, the board is going to decide and say like, well, that's what I want. That's what we want. But I think, like I said, I took a note of that, and what we'll do is we'll kind of make, I don't know if we even, like, is this what we want to use as a starting point, or kind of based on the principle of a fund balance policy, like come with something based on, what I'm hearing is really more flexibility. Like, and I agree with flexibility. And then, instead of hey, it's this percentage, a range. Because that'll give, the board, the superintendent, whoever that may be, right, in the future, it'll allow them, it'll force those conversations, but it will also allow them to kind of move and use funding as needed to implement their visions, their board goals, and all the things that need to be done, which I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from the group. I don't know if I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah, I like the idea of some examples of uses and some sort of description of a process. I also really liked Eric's suggestion of a wider and going, like, expanding on the lower end, that percentage, based on the political climate of, are we getting our bonds passed? Are we getting override funding?
So if possible, could you maybe, based on the notes taken, maybe draft, since this was one that was kind of pulled out from storage, and maybe kind of draft something based on the feedback, and then we can revisit later based on what the updates are?
Yep, we can do that.
Wonderful. Is there any additional discussion or feedback? Ms. Schaefer?
Dr. D'Alba, do you know if this will be covered within the demographic study? Does it touch at all?
No, the demographic study, as we asked for projections on population and enrollment, and then we also asked for career, different types of, like, what careers are coming to Arizona and which ones we project to be high needs careers. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, is to really kind of start thinking of like, okay, how do we revamp our CTE programming, our academic program in general, to be able to provide students with the opportunities to go into careers that we know will be coming to Arizona. But it's certainly a question, like, I mean, we can ask that. They're not really going to have any context for it besides like, well, it looks like your enrollment's going down or doing this. That's really what it was for, is to determine enrollment, areas of the city where it's growing, so within our district where are we growing, and then what are career areas as they relate to what we offer as well. So looking at what we offer and how we can expand in a sense.
And then my follow-up question, thinking about what maybe questions the board or the community might have. We've done it for so many decades without it. I'm wondering, is this something that most districts are turning to, and what might be other, what it is, what are other districts doing? Like, what's the percentage?
I don't know, there's not too many districts in Arizona that have it. I do know that it seems like every few years our reporting gets more restrictive. Or there's more questions asked as to what we have to submit. I want to say, was it 2 or 3 years ago? I can't remember when we had to actually start. It was a few years ago, right? Where they added essentially a page like, hey, what are your fund balances? Do you have a policy? How do you determine how to use them, type of thing? What are you planning to use them on? And so that's, it's a discussion, I think, within districts. I don't know that there's too many that have adopted it yet. There's a lot of legislative action right now that may have a potential impact on budgets and schools in general.
Throughout this discussion, one thing is very clear, is to Mr. Thompson's point and everyone speaking, is there is a lot of flexibility for us to design the recommendations for the board. Is it a bigger fund or lower fund? Because the quintessential thing is we have to teach our kids. We can't keep it, that kind of, there is a lot of, that's a good news. But also, the heart of this is to bring transparency. We don't want to be a district where the board and the community will know. Tomorrow, there may be no budget committee or a leader who is so interested to be transparent. But still, a policy like this will force that the transparency, when we are dipping into that lower levels, will be brought to community's attention. Is that how I understand it, right? That's a core intent of such policies, right? Which will be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when this was brought up, and kind of in my head, what I thought was, this is a good way to ensure that long-term sustainability, regardless of what's happening. And I think as we move forward to respond in a sense to your question of like community concerns, that like we've been doing it for so long without one, as we move forward, we're kind of, I would say we're already in an era that we probably, public education hasn't been in a very long time. I think maybe there's been other times when there was decreases in enrollment and different things, but this is now this free market type education system that is created is very unique to Arizona and very different. And it is I think there's more challenges moving forward, especially attracting students, being able to provide a holistic array of services to students, and being able to have the funds to be able to have that available to students. And I think that regularly we see, we're seeing more and more public school districts kind of going into areas where they don't have sufficient funds, or they're kind of scrambling to do different things. And it is, sometimes it is smaller districts. Coming from a small district, I know the challenge that it is, because even just paying for summer payroll there is hard without restrictions. But I will say that something like this at least will get that conversation started, which we regularly have, but like regardless of who's here, right? Our board is very proactive. Our board is very willing to learn about finance. They ask questions. They want to know, kind of where we're going. And so that's a good thing. But moving forward, right, we can't control who's elected, who's not, who comes in, who comes out. And that may or may, there's shifts that can happen. And so I think that, while we're lucky to have the board that we have right now. You know, moving forward, a lot of different things can happen. So.
Any last discussion items? Okay. If not, the last item on the agenda is adjournment. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. Could I have a second?
I second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned, 5:52. Thank you.